Another famous programme that you made back in the late 90s was about the National Front. We've now got this kind of new phenomenon, the EDL. What do you think you learnt during that programme that can inform us about how groups like this operate?
Nick Griffin is no fool. He's a Cambridge graduate. And I think he's tried to remove himself one stage beyond, get the foot soldiers to do it, stop banging on about throwing people out, but trying to get people, just convert them to his way of thinking and do it through the system. I don't know that it'll work, but at least when we made his program, he was found guilty of fomenting racial hatred.
The Hillsborough tragedy has been in the news recently again. Now, this is something I think that you worked on as part of the Cook report. So can you give us your take on what really happened that day and possibly also why it didn't come out at the time?
Well, there was a big cover-up. There was a monster cover-up. We could see it going on. 5 years after the tragedy, we decided to make a programme. ITV didn't really want it. Nobody wanted to do the programme. The whole thing was considered to be a ghastly mess. But we met a lady called Anne Williams, whose son Kevin, who was 15, was one of the victims. And the really strong thing about Kevin's case was that he was alive up until nearly 4 o'clock when he died in the arms of a policewoman called Deborah Martin. Now, the coroner, Dr. Stephen Popper, had decided, for whatever reason, whether he was instructed to do so, I don't know, that the cut-off time for his inquiry should be 3:15, which meant that nothing was investigated after that, not what the faults of the ambulance service had been, or more largely what the police had failed to do. All he was able to do was determine the cause of death, which was usually asphyxia of people who had clearly died before that time. And then, of course, the preceding Taylor report had determined that the blame for it was failure of police control. We interviewed Dr. Popper exclusively, and he wouldn't have it that it wasn't an accidental death because he ruled that all the people had died accidentally, which really offended the relatives. Because after 3:15, there were a number of people who were clearly alive. The families thought, even back then, they're probably about 30. We now know, after the independent panel, there were 41 people who might have been saved, which is appalling. We know that, going back to the Taylor report, that the police started it all by opening an exit gate to try and let people into the pens on the Leppings Lane end of the ground. They were already overcrowded, and it was a complete disaster. And within minutes, people were dying, and the match was stopped 5 or 6 minutes in, when people were trying to climb over the fence to stop being suffocated, and the police were trying to turn them back because they thought it was a pitch invasion. I mean, it was utterly, utterly disorganised. We spoke to WPC Deborah Martin, who had cradled Kevin in her arms when he died. She'd said she'd seen a number of other people alive. Other people had. We spoke and traced Tony Edwards, the only ambulance driver allowed onto the pitch. 44 ambulances were summoned, but only one was allowed onto the pitch by the police. He was just swamped, and he said he wished he could have done more, and if there'd been proper preparation, the story would have been very different. We tracked down to a couple of junior policemen who'd been on duty on the Leppings Lane end of the ground at Hillsborough, and who'd said nobody was in command. It was absolute paralysis at the management end of the police chain of command. And the man who was in charge, Chief Superintendent David Duckenfield, known to some of his critics as David Duck and Weave, we confronted at the time, and he just ducked and weaved. He subsequently was prosecuted privately, having tried to say that it was the fans who'd forced the gate open when he'd actually ordered it himself. He then thought perhaps he better not turn up at this private prosecution, which then failed. He then avoided disciplinary action by taking early retirement, claiming to suffer from post-traumatic stress on a full pension. All this material, which has now come out in the independent panel, we had more or less in chapter and verse 5 years after the event, yet it took another nearly 2 decades for it to come out, and that is absolutely disgraceful. There was a monster cover-up. People like Deborah Martin, these young policemen we traced, were all heavied. And poor old Deborah Martin was visited by very, very pushy police officers on 3 occasions who bullied and browbeat her, she says, into changing the original statement we'd made, and lots of people did that. So there was a large-scale, heavy-duty cover-up. it just took forever. I mean, people wanted to believe that the police were decent and the authorities were decent. Well, they were all conspiring, I believe, to make sure that this got swept under the carpet. And I'm very pleased that the independent panel has come to the same conclusion on the same evidence that we presented 18 years ago.
Now, one of the Liverpool MPs was saying when the independent panel came up with its results that this could never happen now.
Oh, I believe it could, because the systems are still not in place. Okay, so standing room at grounds is now very different from what it used to be. But, you know, you've got to have decent people in charge. And it is said that at Hillsborough there was a major incident plan, but people were cowering under tables and not implementing it. And it's the quality of the staff. If the training and the staff quality isn't there, then there will be another incident of this kind. Another
programme that you did towards the end of the Cook report was one about satanic abuse. Now, this is people like Private Eye will say this doesn't exist. What did you find out about it?
Well, as far as we could see, it did. I mean, it wasn't as widespread as some people tried to say, but on the other hand, those who said it didn't exist were clearly wrong. We centred on a bizarre shop called the Sorcerers Apprentice, run by a weird man called Chris Bray, who sold all the appurtenances for conducting satanic ceremonies, but also served as a distribution point for literature advocating satanic abuse and child abuse, and a meeting place for such people. It was in Yorkshire somewhere. The programme went out and he complained to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, which was then the regulator, and he was just about the only one who was turned away at the door. You know, he'd made absolutely outrageous complaints, and he was found against. He still went on his website, publicising my address, inviting his supporters to come and punish me as they saw fit, and claiming that he had been found entirely right by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission when he hadn't, and that ITV had had to apologise on the air and publish a full apology in TV Times, none of which was true. And as far as I know, he's still mad enough to be doing that today.
Well, going back to where we started with the news of the world, what are your thoughts about the Leveson inquiry and the expose of phone hacking and some quite serious criminal activity? Just in the news this week is information suggesting that burglaries were ordered from the newsroom.
Oh, I fully believe it. I mean, they were totally out of control. When I was done over by the News of the World, my little local exchange wasn't digital, so there's no footprint to prove it. But my phone, I believe, and so does my lawyer believe, was not just hacked, but tapped. Hacking is just picking up messages from somebody's mobile. Tapping is listening in real time to both sides of a conversation. And we know this because a man calling himself Steve rang up during the course of the legal action we were taking against the News of the World, saying that he was an ex-News of the World reporter, he was on my side, and he could offer me all kinds of information. We should have a chat. And it became very clear that he was on a fishing expedition, sponsored, I believe, by the News of the World, because he knew some stuff that nobody else did know. For example, he knew that the News of the World's major witness had come to us and completely retracted his testimony. Now, the only people who knew that at that stage were my solicitor and me, because it had only happened the day before and we'd had a phone conversation about it. There's no doubt in my mind that they tapped my phone. But as I said, no digital footprint. It's only circumstantial evidence. But in this case, I believe it's good enough for me. And it was a very serious offence, far more serious than hacking, because there were people attempting to pervert the course of an ongoing high-profile libel case. And if they do that sort of thing, they do anything. I've seen people talking, heard people talking about break-ins to get evidence, even break-ins to steal the picture of a deceased person, the victim of a road accident or a mining disaster or something, off the mantelpiece of the bereaved in order to be the only ones with a picture. I mean, no morals whatsoever. So the sort of stuff that came out during Leveson was no surprise at all. The only thing that did surprise me, I suppose, was when Michael Gove MP, himself a journalist, did say that he thought the way the inquiry was being conducted would engender an atmosphere of fear amongst journalists. And then Lord Leveson complained to the Cabinet Office that Michael Gove had exercised the very freedom of speech that was in question by complaining. By saying that, he was undermining the investigation.
What about the results of Leveson? What would you like to see by way of regulation? Is there any way you think that the editors or the industry itself can self-regulate, which is what the PCC was doing?
The PCC wasn't self-regulating. The PCC was self-serving. Big difference. I don't believe in statutory regulation. That's the thin end of a wedge, which I would hate to see. But there has to be some form of control, perhaps like on the Irish model, where there's a bit of statutory backup, but it's not in the front line, and that there are real penalties for people who transgress. I mean, at the moment there aren't.
So finally, Roger, have you retired?
No. I think if you're retired, you're dead. I still do things. In fact, I teach. I'm, would you believe, Emeritus Professor of Broadcast Journalism at Nottingham Trent University. And I still do the odd programme, and I've got another edition of my autobiography coming out in the next few weeks. So, no, I'm not letting the brain die. The body might be, but the brain's all right.
What about your programme archives? Because I think there's quite a lot of people who are looking forward to them coming out on DVD.
Well, two reasons that wouldn't happen. One, they were considered by ITV to be legally dubious, and they didn't want to have people suing them on DVDs. Well, I think that's a load of rubbish. Anyway, they were all sent to a big storage facility called Iron Mountain in London, which a few years ago burnt down. So there's absolutely nothing left except the odd bit on YouTube and a few memories.
Well, I wonder if you've got a bit of Roger Cook's Cook Report left in your attic on one of those old VHS videos. If you'd like to put it online and you're not able to do it yourself, of course, you can give us a call and we'll try and help you do that. But that was almost the most disappointing part of that, Martin, was hearing that the Iron Mountain people in charge of Roger Cook's DVD archive had just let the whole lot go up in flames.
Yes, but I mean, you're interviewing Roger there now, and that, of course, can be kept and will be kept, hopefully, for future generations and for reference.
So why do you think Mr. Murdoch and the News of the World had it in for Roger?
Well, I was asking you that question before you asked me that question. I'm not quite sure. Clearly, he had lots of enemies because he's fighting various power structures, and clearly ITV, at the end of the day, they'd rather be doing something like X Factor, wouldn't they? Or, the kind of whole purpose of having investigative journalism is incredibly problematic for people who are just looking for an easy ride.
But as I pointed out, 10 million viewers, you can't sniff at it. The advertisers will pay for that kind of audience.
Maybe they will, but at the same time, you've also got the legal problems that go with it. As he said, we were sued loads of times, but we managed to get away. We managed to succeed every time because we were very careful about how we went about things.
They were never successfully sued. So I mean, surely you've got to have a robust barrister in there, just making sure that the people who are trying to take you out legally that you've got a good defence.
How much easier to do reality TV? How much easier?
And how much cheaper?
Indeed.
Anyway, he's taking on organised crime. Quite a lot of what Roger was doing was very high-level organised crime. Probably the highest was what we heard there about him taking on the Russian mafia, selling plutonium and SS-20 warheads. Yeah,
pretty serious stuff. I mean, why don't we have that on mainstream television? Good question.
Drive Time on BCFM, 5 till 7 on 93.2 FM.